Hi, I'm John from Just Whiskey. If you like today's show, please give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. And thank you for all the new subscribers coming on board to share my whiskey journey. But remember, folks, it's just whiskey. Today we're going to be talking about and reviewing the Bowmore 10-year-old Dorus Mor Batch 1 cask strength, released in 2012, quite a while ago. And it's still on some shelves, so it's still available, believe it or not. Before we get into the review, I can't help but mention today's Ralphie rant about Ardbeg, specifically the new release, the punked Oddcore. And if you're a Patreon, then I'm sure you've gotten his video. I'm not going to get too much into his rant. It's very, very interesting. But I do want to point out something that he said, which is going to segue into something else, and then we're going to segue into this review. It won't take too long, folks, but I think you'll find it interesting. So, according to Ralphie's research, somebody told him that they had a bottle of the Ardbeg Ardcore, and they were from Hungary, and the bottle states caramel coloring added, which is interesting because most Ardbeg fans, including myself, in a past life, I'm moving on from Ardbeg, and I'll tell you why. But a lot of us reviewers, we assume the Ardbeg 10. It's almost as clear as water. I seriously doubt there's any coloring in the Ardbeg 10, but they are obviously going crazy with their marketing and their prices, and they're taking shortcuts and jacking the prices. So I just found it interesting that the new Ardbeg Ardcore potentially has some artificial coloring added to it. But most of us assume that everything that Ardbeg does is non-chill filtered, no color added. The reason why I brought that up, and the reason why I thought it was interesting, but before I get to that, the reason why I'm kind of done now with Ardbeg is mainly because of that Ardbog, those two casks where they issued NFTs, and the marketing video that Ardbeg produced. Very clever, 2 or 3 minute marketing thing where he's in the representative from Ardbeg is in this fake bog, and but he said, something to the effect of, for those few people out there that are lucky enough to, secure a bottle of this rare, Ardbog, backed up by NFTs and stored in China. When I just heard him say that, lucky enough, really, for the price that they were charging for those NFTs was insane. Which the color thing, I just want to segue. I recently reviewed the Springbank 10 local barley, and it was 57.3% ABV, and I just assumed that was cask strength. But one of my subscribers in the comments suggested that it's not cask strength. And it is not labeled as cask strength. That was an assumption on myself. But one thing that also I assume with Springbank, like I think we all do, is that they do not chill filter, and they do not put artificial coloring in there. However, this Springbank 10 local barley that I recently reviewed, 57.3%, mentions nothing about cask strength, and nowhere in the packaging or the bottle does it say anything about non-chill filtering or natural color. So that was an assumption on my part. And then another thing, another Springbank, just as an example, which I previously reviewed, the Springbank 17-year-old. Nowhere on the bottle does it mention anything about non-chill filtering, or natural color or artificial color. No mention whatsoever on here about that. So I hate to use Ardbeg as an example, but maybe we shouldn't assume some of the things that we do assume. We assume that Springbank is always integrity, and I think they are. But I think a lot of people assume Ardbeg was or is all integrity, and maybe they're not. So the old adage, which many of us say, right, if it doesn't clearly state it on the bottle or the packaging, then we shouldn't be making assumptions, I guess. Okay, back to the review of this Bowmore 10-year-old cask strength, small batch, release number 1, matured in first fill bourbon, and no mention of natural coloring on this. If they do, I wouldn't imagine they put too much in there, but it is possible. In this bottle, there are some little floaters in there, so there's definitely some cask debris in there. So it's a wallop of a dram. It comes in at 55.1% ABV, and they do state that it's cask strength. And my understanding is that this is an exclusive United States release, but it's equivalent or similar or the same as the Tempest, which is a UK release, or European UK release. And my understanding is that for some legal reason they couldn't use the word Tempest, so they changed it to Dorus Mor. So this batch 1 from 2012 United States, I think, is probably the same or similar to the Tempest, maybe batch 3 or batch 4. I'm not really quite sure on that. And supposedly, from what information I could find, is that, a small batch, only 2,400 bottles of this were released, yet it is still available for around $100 a bottle, maybe a little bit more, depending on your area. But you can still find it, surprisingly. So maybe that says something. All right, let's get into this review. This has been open for quite a while, I'll tell you. And when I first opened this up, it was a challenging whiskey. I'd never experienced anything quite like this before. And for sake of transparency, this is the first Bowmore I've ever bought or drank, mainly because their core releases, they're 3 strikes and you're out, in my opinion. 40% ABV, chill filtered, coloring added. So I've just decided, made a decision a long time ago. And I've never heard great reviews about their core release. So, but I would be open to an independent cask strength release in the future or something to that effect. All right, back to the review here. This is a very interesting, challenging whiskey from my point of view. It took me a long time to wrap my head around this. So if you're up for the challenge, if you like Bowmore, I would say get it. All right, the nose. I recommend probably a little bit of water. This is a ballsy, robust offering. The nose, you're going to get spearmint and a hint of something burnt in there, but I can't quite figure out what it is, but a slight burnt note of something. Spearmint, maybe a little bit of vanilla. Yeah, there's vanilla in there. And then the palate. This is a lengthy list, and then I'm also going to read what they say about it, because I think it's interesting as hell. Okay, palate. It's robust. It's viscous. it's strong. You get pepper, medicinal notes, specifically gauze pads, like the kind you get in a dentist after they pull your tooth. You clamp down on a couple of gauze pads. And the gauze pads kind of reminds me of that old cheap tequila we used to drink as a kid that had the little worm in the bottle, and it was like whatever, $3 or $4 a bottle or something like that, which was a lot of money back then. But it had that gauze. I always remember it having that gauze pad, medicinal flavor to it. Okay, on the palate, a little bit of fish oil, definitely oak spice, a slight sweetness, a little bit of dryness. There's a little bit of menthol in there. It's very vibrant, with a slight vegetal note, like fermented fruits, even fermented and rotting fruits, melons, fermented melon, fermented fruit, mint, and it has that vegetal peat, fermented, fruity vegetal thing going on. None of these are like super prominent, but they're all in there. The finish. Yeah, it's got that vegetal funk. The finish is long. Long oak spice, slightly sweet, with a little bit of hint of lingering ash in there. Okay. The tasting notes, as they describe them, and boy, they really get into it here. Breathe in menthol and sweet coconut fused with toasted vanilla and an ocean breeze. As the liquid ebbs and flows, ripe oranges and kumquat burst from the glass with cedarwood. A splash of water releases tangy seaweed tempered by sweet vanilla ice cream and sugared almonds. Burst of tangy, ripe clementines, lemon sherbet, and grapefruit. Deeper layers of peppery peat, pistachio, and pine nuts are carried by a wave of smooth vanilla. Rippling layers of citrus, bourbon vanilla spice, and wispy smoke. All that in a bag of chips. So I didn't pick up a third to half of what they say, but there's a lot going on in here. And if you like Bowmore, or if you're looking for a robust, strong, challenging, interesting whiskey, then I'd recommend. Again, you can buy it for a little over $100 in my area. How would I score this? Finally, you say, after all this, here we go. We're in 13 minutes and I haven't even scored it yet. Okay. I would rate the experience I had with this at a higher score than what I'm going to give it, because the score I'm going to give it is my enjoyment factor, my reachability. Okay, so I would score this between an 86 and an 87. It could score higher for an experience point of view, but for my reachability, for my enjoyment, 86 to 87. I will probably put this aside now for quite some time and revisit it in several months and see what happens out of it. So that is my review. I hope you liked today's show. If you did, give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe, and consider becoming a Patreon with the link in the description below. Hats off to you all, and take care.